Okay, so before we get into today's video, I'm going to actually put this little disclaimer up right now that this video is just meant to be informational, so please do not attack anybody who has been mentioned in this video. Please don't, use this video as an excuse to harass, and don't say you came from this video. But yeah, this video is literally only used to be informational. So, with that disclaimer out the way, let's get into our topic at hand, which is SAG-AFTRA. Now, they've been striking quite a bit lately, for the past maybe like 2 years in different industries. But before we really get into the nitty and gritty, let me just explain to you what a union is. So, a union is an organization formed by workers who join together and use their strength to have a voice in their workplace. Through their union, workers have the ability to negotiate from a position of strength with employers over wages, benefits, workplace health and safety, job training, and other work-related issues. And so that just basically means that between the worker, the company, the union, it works as like a middleman in between. So that's the way they work to help negotiate because, a company can't work without workers, but workers also need to have, minimum benefits. And something that's rather controversial nowadays is the fact that, workers aren't really being compensated properly for what they rightfully believe that is theirs. And so anyways, one very infamous union or famous union is actually called the Screen Actors Guild, or known as SAG, and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, or AFTRA. So together it is formed as SAG-AFTRA. So we're going to go into a little bit of history with the company, or about the union rather, because I believe that context is always important to understand. So essentially in 1933, the Screen Actors Guild was founded by Ralph Morgan and Eddie Cantor, who became the first two presidents. And mind you that the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists actually was a different branch before 2012. So here in the timeline, it says here 2012 was when Ken Howard continues to be the SAG president and Robert Reardon continues as AFTRA national president. However, there is a merger of SAG and AFTRA, which was achieved on March 30th, and AFTRA's 75th anniversary, which will be its last began. And of course, moving along, there was the merger on March 30th, 2012. Members of both SAG and AFTRA overwhelmingly approved a merger of the two unions. The SAG-AFTRA is born, and SAG president Ken Howard and AFTRA national president Robert Reardon become SAG-AFTRA co-presidents. And so that's basically a very, very, very brief rundown of what is this company. But now that we understand when it was formed, let's actually understand, what they're about. So here we have, from their official website, SAG-AFTRA represents approximately 160,000 actors, announcers, broadcast journalists, dancers, DJs, news writers, news editors, program hosts, puppeteers, recording artists, singers, stunt performers, voiceover artists, and other media professionals. So just to give you a really broad idea, there's a lot of mainstream actors and like writers, and even small-time voice actors and actresses that fall under this whole SAG-AFTRA, because it is a union. And remember that unions were made as a way to negotiate for workers. So keep in mind that, especially when it comes back in the day when it came to filming, before it was formed, there's a lot of disputes over, worker rights and how much can companies exploit. And so that is really why unions are here in the first place. And it's no different when you get into the entertainment industry. So moving along, it says here, SAG-AFTRA members are the faces and voices that entertain and inform America and the world, with national offices in Los Angeles and New York and local offices nationwide. SAG-AFTRA members work together to secure the strongest protections for media artists into the 21st century and beyond. Mission statement. SAG-AFTRA brings together two great American labor unions, Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Hosts, were formed in the turmoil of the 1930s. Mind you, that was actually the Great Depression, so that actually helps to contextualize even more. With rich histories of fighting for and securing the strongest protections for media artists. Our media united to form the successor union in order to preserve those hard-won rights and to continue the struggle to extend and expand those protections into the 21st century and beyond. We are actors, announcers, broadcast performers, dancers, DJs, news writers, news directors, program hosts, puppeteers, recording artists, singers, stunt performers, voiceover artists, and other professionals. Our work is seen and heard in theaters, on television and radio, sound recordings, the internet, games, mobile devices, home video. You see us and you hear us all over media distribution platforms. We are the faces and the voices that entertain and inform America and the world. So now that we understand exactly who we're dealing with, now the question you might be asking is, so why should an actor or actress join SAG? And then with assembly here, you have, well, their reasons are: if you are not already a member, we urge you considering joining when you meet SAG-AFTRA eligibility. Our members are the top professionals in their field, united in belief in standard working conditions, compensation, and beliefs or benefits. But understand it is a commitment. Once you are a member, you must abide by the rules of membership, starting with the Global One rule, or Rule Global One. How to join? Membership is a significant rite of passage for every working actor, broadcaster, and recording artist. A performer becomes eligible for membership under one of the following conditions: proof of SAG-AFTRA, SAG or AFTRA, covered employment as a principal employer or recording artist, proof of 3 days of SAG-AFTRA, SAG or AFTRA, employment as a background actor, or employment under an affiliated performers union. Potential broadcast members should contact the National Broadcast Department or their nearest local for information on joining. And of course, there's benefits, deals and discounts, all that stuff. And so that's roughly what's going on here with the whole idea of SAG. So essentially, like I said earlier, and I'm really reiterating, this is basically a middleman when it comes down to, negotiating contracts and proper pay. Because take it this way, right? Imagine you are an independent. You have to negotiate your own contracts. You have to negotiate your own projects every single step of the way. And sometimes actors or actresses have to take on a lot of gigs at a time. So putting it into perspective, a union is never actually inherently a bad thing. It's just that when you really compare it to being independent and comparing to having a union, you can kind of see that's why most people will opt into it. However, there are some rules. And so specifically looking at the eligibility requirements for SAG-AFTRA membership, it just says here, a performer becomes eligible for SAG-AFTRA memberships under one of the two following conditions: proof of SAG-AFTRA, SAG or AFTRA employment, or employment under an affiliated performers union. Here's what you need to qualify. SAG-AFTRA membership is available to those who work in a position covered by a SAG-AFTRA collective bargaining agreement, provided that any person qualifying true work as a background actor must have completed 3 days of work as a background actor under a SAG-AFTRA collective bargaining agreement. Membership is also available to those who work 1 day of employment in a principal speaking role or as a recording artist in a SAG-AFTRA covered production. Performers may join SAG-AFTRA if the applicant has paid a membership of an affiliated performers union such as ACTRA, AEA, AGMA, or AGVA for a period of 1 year and has worked and been paid for at least once as a principal performer in that union's jurisdiction. Potential broadcast members should contact the National Broadcast Department or their local information for joining. So not only do you have to, pay to use SAG or pay a fee, you also have to work at any project. And now, I will say that compared to other unions that I'm familiar with, especially with jobs that I've worked, just to draw like a very minor comparison, most times the union fees are just taken off of your paycheck. So you don't pay to be in the union. You're technically signed into the union as soon as you start the job or you sign a contract. And compare that to this, where you have to basically pay to get in, that's really what we have here. So different unions work different ways. But the unions that I'm mostly familiar with are the ones that involve, getting your paycheck deducted. So just to give you guys some perspective on, unions that you're probably most familiar with, but this one here works a bit differently, as you can see here. But they all, in the end, serve the same function, where it's like you have your negotiations that you want to make, and you want to have your proper pay, and you want to have, your rights. And so that's what SAG takes care of, just for the entertainment industry. As you know, gigs in entertainment work a bit differently than your average person, but for the most part, processes, applying for a job. You apply, you audition, and then they choose if you get the part or not. And for maybe someone who works 9 to 5, it's apply, interview, and you might or may get the job. So that's really what it is. So SAG-AFTRA has done strikes in the past. And the most notable one of recent memory is the one that happened in 2023, where it was the American Actors Union went on strike over a labor dispute with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, and it was actually the longest strike in SAG-AFTRA history. Its combined with impact with the 2023 Writers Guild of America strike resulted in the loss of 45,000 jobs and an estimated $6.5 billion loss to the economy of Southern California. Just to keep in mind, California is where a lot of movie stars live. A lot of people of higher status live in California. So keep that in mind, that 6.5 billion out of the entertainment industry is a lot to go off of. And so it says also in our summary here, along with the 2023 Writers Guild America strike, it was part of a series of broader Hollywood labor disputes. Both the 2023 SAG-AFTRA and WGA strikes contributed to the biggest interruption to the American film and television industry since the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, just 3 years prior. In addition to standing in solidarity with the writers, the strike was led by changes in the industry caused by streaming and its effect on residuals, as well as other new technologies like AI and digital creation. And AI is going to be very important later on, so keep that in the back of your mind. It marked the first time that actors initiated a labor dispute in the US since the 1980 actor strike, and the first time that actors and writers have walked out simultaneously since 1960. So, just so we can dial stuff back a bit and take in what we just learned, it turns out that, yeah, people were not very happy with, the way that pay was going on and the way that happened when it came to writing or acting after COVID. So when it happened, a lot of shows actually went on break during that time because of a writer's strike, because a writer has to write the show. Okay, you can have an actor, but an actor is technically the bottom of the, not technically, an actor is the bottom of the barrel when it comes down to entertainment. But they may be the face of the show, they may be the ones being out there, but you have to have somebody who writes it, you have to have a director, you have to have a co-writer, co-director, all that stuff. So when you have a writer walking out, you can only do so much. And keep in mind too that when you have to go on strike, especially if you know how real world strikes work as well, not just entertainment strikes, you are not supposed to be working. So even if people want to work, they're not allowed to work. And that's also going to be very important later on, as we're going to learn. But now, time to get to the main topic of this video. That is currently the SAG-AFTRA strike in terms of video games. And this one is very much complicated because there's actually a lot of layers and a lot of moving parts that go in and out of it. But so that I can guide you to these moving parts, let's look at the first, a general broad sense of what we're talking about here. So here it says here the picket event, and this is the video game strike picket at Formosa Interactive LLC. It says here, we're fighting for our survival. SAG-AFTRA members have been on strike against video game employers since July 26, 2024, while negotiations have resulted in finding common ground on some contract terms, we remain far apart on provisions that will ensure fundamental AI protections for our members. We encourage you to read this extensive, updated comparison chart of AI proposals to see for yourself the loophole-filled language employers are proposing instead of the transparent, enforceable AI guardrails we deserve. Every voice matters in this fight. Click here to learn how you can help support the strike, both virtually and in person. So, not only did movies and writing and television get affected, also video games are still being affected up until now. And there's actually been a lot of video games that have been on strike for so long that some characters have even been voiceless and people haven't been able to listen, at least in terms of some dubbing. But what if I told you that we actually got a recent update actually on March 11th of 2025. Dear member, as our video game strike on the interactive media agreement continues, we want to take a moment to celebrate your continued solidarity and update you on the latest, and we have an ask performers who don't currently work on the contract. Though progress has been made and agreements have been reached on certain provisions, we launched our strike last year. The last proposal the bargaining group made is still filled with alarming loopholes that will leave our members vulnerable to AI abuse. The union recently submitted a counter to this proposal that diligently addresses all of the loopholes and would result in a contract that offers the minimum protections our members need in order to maintain sustainable careers as video game performers. The bargaining group would have you believe that we are close to reaching a deal. This is not the case. They are hoping our members will turn on each other. We encourage you to read this extensive updated comparison chart of AI proposals to see for yourself how far apart on fundamental AI protections for all performers. They want to use all past performances and any performance that they can source from outside the contract without any of the protections being bargained at all. You could be told about your replica being used, offered nothing in the way of payment, and you could do nothing about it. They want to be able to make your replica continue to work as you during a future strike, whether you like it or not. And once you've given your specific consent for how your replica can be used, they refuse to tell you what they actually did with it. Even as we remain frustratingly far apart with the bargaining group, we have been having great success with other employers. More than 160 games have now signed on to our interim and independent agreements, and the total earnings of these projects have exceeded that of non-struck games. Those agreements contain the protections we have been asking for bargaining group for terms that are clearly feasible and acceptable to a great number of game companies of all sizes, even as the bargaining companies resist. And in the coming weeks, we will be releasing the Student Interactive Waiver Agreement and our Game Jam Waiver Agreement, both of which will continue to allow developers at every stage of their career to work with SAG-AFTRA members. More information will be available soon. With their previously signed projects dragging their feet through the production pipeline, employers are feeling the squeeze from the strike as SAG-AFTRA members who work in video games continue to stand together and refuse to work without adequate protections. This is causing employers to seek other performers they can exploit to fill those roles, including those who don't typically perform in games. If you're approached for such a role, we urge you to seriously consider the consequences. Not only would you be undermining the efforts of your fellow members, but you would be putting yourself at risk of working without protections against AI misuse. And AI misuse is just a nice way of saying that these companies want to use your performance to replace you without consent compensation. So, a lot to take in. But essentially, it appears that there has been actually a lot of progress being made when it comes down to SAG-AFTRA and the video game strikes. And the fact that more than 160 games, or I don't know if it says game, it says games particularly, but it could also mean game studios, have signed to the interim agreement. So showing that, like I said, there is progress being made here. But to give you really a true scope of how big those SAG-AFTRA actually is, I do want to look at really, really big companies, which will be really relevant to this video, when it comes down to Side Studio and Formosa. And they are known for providing voice work for a lot of games. So starting off with Side Studio, her About Me page said, "We believe great work gets done by teams who love what they do. We're a global team of passionate, hardworking, ambitious gamers whose goal is to make every gamer's experience as perfect as possible. We're dedicated to helping your players because they're part of our community too. We've been working hard for players, clients, and the games industry for over 3 decades, providing industry-leading services to every part of the globe." And so if you take a look at their catalog like really quickly, you can see that they worked on some very big games, literally like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is one of the better selling games that has come out recently. They worked on that. They've also worked on Baldur's Gate 3. They've worked on FF7 Rebirth. So they're no joke when it comes down to leading the industry in terms of voice work. And in case you're wondering, they are also SAG-AFTRA and IMA signatory. So it means that they have gotten everything covered down when it comes down to SAG-AFTRA certified, and they're also in agreement with the Interactive Media Agreement. Said simply, whether you're interested in pursuing a union or non-union project, our team is an expert in contracting, booking, and paying voice talent. So they're basically offering options towards both union and non-union actors. However, looking at that, when we go a bit more into someone else, like say Formosa, for instance, they are also SAG certified, and they're also here. They have projects such as God of War, Avatar, Helldivers 2, Suicide Squad, Guild of Justice League, Dead Space. You also have Nightingale and Modern Warfare 3. So a lot of the big projects and a lot of the big selling games, these two are one of the biggest leaders in terms of that. And so you can even see that they also say here at the bottom, they say we are longtime SAG-AFTRA signatories and offer localization in most languages and with proven international authenticity. So it's quite a lot to take in. However, what if I told you that there's a specific game that Formosa was involved with that had a bit of a controversy, to say the least, and that would be Genshin Impact. And so it turns out that Formosa had this controversy where Genshin Impact actors actually said that they're struggling to pay rent because they had payment that had been withheld for them for at least 4 months, allegedly. So here from this article, I got courtesy of the Wayback Machine. It says here that Hoyoverse has provided us with a statement regarding the missing payments for Genshin Impact voice actors. So this is apparently what Hoyoverse officially said about the situation. And it says here, "We truly regret to learn about the ongoing situation. Genshin Impact values respect and respects the work and effort of everyone involved, and we support our voice actors to claim their proper due. We have made payments to our recording studio on time, and we immediately urged the studio to pay our voice actors from our past payment. Meanwhile, we are also seeking alternative solutions, and we will keep you posted on further developments. So that's what they said here. And even someone who works on the game, someone named Karina Boetger, says here, who voices the voice of Paimon, or the mascot of Genshin Impact, and she says here, and Brandon Wickler, who is credited with several minor roles, claimed on social media that they haven't paid for months for their work on the game, and Winkler explicitly named Hoyoverse's flagship title as the source of his woes, while Boetger was a bit less specific. And so this is your Boetger, who was by far the most lines of any voice actor in the game, wrote that they're being owed thousands of dollars and are struggling currently to pay rent because of this. And so here we have also, even further along in the article, says here that the English dub of Genshin Impact is being handled by a studio called Formosa, which we just looked at, which in 2016 was already a subject of a video game voice actor strike due to unfair working conditions. The company's CEO resigned in April of 2023. And so, however, if you actually compare it to another Hoyoverse game that has been done, Honkai Star Rail, Winkler actually said that the English dub is being handled by a different studio called Rocket Sound, and which the voice actor said he loves to work with. And so, allegedly speaking, at least looking at Formosa in general, it turns out that in terms of some projects, it appears that they are not exactly the best to work with. So, in light of that, it actually turns out that Hoyoverse actually decided to partner with Side Global for Genshin Impact voice recording. And in case you're kind of wondering why is this really important, is because right now when it comes to especially Genshin Impact, there's a massive strike going on where a lot of characters, as I said earlier in the video, but I'll say again, are actually voiceless. Yes, so lots of characters that people might be fan favorites of are basically not being voiced. So compared to, say, I don't know, you see a cutscene in Japanese, for instance, a cutscene would be, played out normally. But in English, you just see lines of text. And that's because everyone who is under the SAG-AFTRA is not allowed to, voice in these games. However, non-union actors and actresses can voice in this game, such as the voice of Paimon. She's allowed to voice because she is not under the union. However, other people are not so lucky.
Hey! Kainari and Kali are over there! And Dia and Candace are with them! Let's go say hi! What? あそこにいるのって、イナリとコレイじゃないか？あ、ティシアとキャンディスもいるぞ！みんなに挨拶しようぜ！
各自の担当は覚えたね。じゃあ、手分けして行動しよう。
And so, now that we have all of our background information and what's going on here, let's look at some rules for the members and look at a piece of a sample contract, because I believe that these will really help nail down what the problem is with this whole, membership stuff and memberships and striking. Because when you really break it down, it's a bit dicey. So I do want to put a bit of a disclaimer when it comes to this sample contract. At least this piece of it that I want you guys to look at. It is very much subject to change, so it's not going to be exactly the one that is being put out right now, but I do want to give it to you guys anyway because, it's important for context. So it actually says here that the interim agreement is entered into between Screen Actors Guild Federation of Television and Radio Artists and an entity that is bona fide employer of performers in an interactive program entitled that is within the scope of SAG-AFTRA Interactive Media Agreement of 2011 to 2014 as amended by the Memorandum of Agreement for the 2017 to 2020 SAG-AFTRA Interactive Media Agreement and the 2020 Extension Agreement to the 2017-2020 SAG-AFTRA Interactive Media Agreement. The SAG-AFTRA Interactive Media Agreement of 2011 to 2014 as amended by the Memorandum of Agreement for the 2017 to 2020 SAG-AFTRA Interactive Media Agreement and as further amended by the 2020 Extension Agreement to the 2017 to 2020 SAG-AFTRA Interactive Media Agreement is hereby referred to as the IMA. SAG-AFTRA and producer are collectively hereafter referred to as the parties. And so that is just from a sample here. It actually, interestingly enough, Remember how we talked about the global one rule back, a bit ago? Actually, here we ended the membership rule. It says here, no member shall render any services or make an agreement to perform services for any employer who has not executed a basic minimum agreement with the union, which is in full force and effect in any jurisdiction in which there is a SAG-AFTRA national collective bargaining agreement in place. This provision applies worldwide. No member shall render any services or make an agreement to perform services for any employer against whom the union is conducting a strike, nor shall any member otherwise violate any strike order of the union. So while we're understanding what this means, so in the global rule 1, you technically cannot work for a company that is not covered by SAG-AFTRA. However, the world is not so black and white. Some people, especially if you're a minor voice actor or actress, or even if you're just a regular actor, sometimes you have to work on projects where to get your notoriety out, you have to take a chance on something. And sometimes the union gigs are all taken. So sometimes you get an oversaturation of market. And maybe somebody who you think you have qualified for the job, some might get it before you. And so people tend to diversify their portfolios. And so, because of that, in the handbook for SAG, there is a bit of a catch. Before we get into that catch, though, I just want to emphasize that when it comes down to Hoyoverse specifically for this case, they are actually not unionized to my knowledge, as far as I know. As far as my research came across, they're not unionized under SAG. So that's why you have people who can work under them. So I just want to put that out there in case, we're a bit confused. But now there is something interesting where when it comes down to non-union workers, they actually are allowed to work under SAG-AFTRA. And in the handbook, it says here, under the Taft-Hartley, which is basically a federal labor law, or an act, it says here that non-union performers who work as principals under a SAG-AFTRA contract have 30 days after the first day of SAG-AFTRA employment during which the performer may work any other job, union or non-union, before joining the union. After the 30th day, the performer must pay the SAG-AFTRA initiation fee before working under a SAG-AFTRA contract again. For background performers, paying the SAG-AFTRA initiation fee after working on the specified number of SAG-AFTRA vouchers is required before working again under a SAG-AFTRA contract, provided 30 days have elapsed since the third day of SAG-AFTRA voucher employment. And even if you go to the actual act here, it also says, Section 8F also provides that entering into such an agreement shall not constitute an unfair labor practice if the agreement contains a union security clause that requires employees to join the union within 7 days after being hired, rather than within the 30-day period provided in the act for other industries. So, essentially, Genshin Impact, or Hoyoverse, at least specifically for Genshin Impact, is in a bit of a catch-22. And let me explain. So the catch-22 is like this. So either they join SAG and then the voice actors can continue working on the game, or they don't join and eventually maybe people will get replaced and then there's a lot of people out of a job. So there's a lot of ethical concerns when it comes down to it, because the whole point of the strikes, as mentioned earlier, was that they're trying to not get their voices AI replicated. But you might be asking yourself then, so what about particularly in China? Because Hoyoverse is based in China. So is there particularly a Chinese law or a case that represents that whole aspect? What if there was? Let me introduce you to the case of Min Jing 0491, Min Chu number 12142. So just to give you guys a brief summary of this case, it just says here that plaintiff is a professional voiceover artist. Defendant 2, Company A, commissioned plaintiff to record her original voice and then license it to Defendant 3, Company B, for AI processing and generation of a commercial product, which was sold through Defendant 4's Company C cloud platform. Defendant 5, Company D, purchased the product for Company 1, or Defendant 1, Company E, which were actually used in the operation of the Defendant 1. Plaintiff claimed that the unauthorized use of her voice by the 5 defendants constituted infringement to her personality rights and demanded cessation of the infringement and compensation for damages. And this year, though, the key issues were: are AI-generated voices protected by personality rights? Can the copyright license for said recordings cover AI-based voice usage? If an infringement exists, how is the liability for each defendant for the infringement divided? And so the court rulings were pretty much as follows: extended protection of personality rights in the voice, separation of copyright and personality rights, and limited liability of the parties were all of them. So just to give you an idea here, so especially for the third one, based on the subjective fault and the linkage of acts, the court ruled that defendant 2, copyright owner of the sound recording, and defendant 3, the technical processor, were jointly liable for the infringement and ordered an apology in compensation of RMB 250,000, circa US $35,000. Defendant 1, the actual user of the device, was required to apologize due to invalid procurement defenses, but was not required to pay damages. And defendant 4, the cloud service provider, and defendant 5, the procurement intermediary, bore no liability due to lack of fault. None of the parties appealed the above judgment. So, understanding all of this, that, in China, you really can't get away with doing this. So the big question you might be asking yourself is, well, we had a Catch-22, what exactly is going on, particularly with Genshin Impact or Hoyoverse games in general, that they can't just, sign a contract or sign this and that? But as we said earlier, this case is a bit more complicated than initially thought of. So now in my research, when looking for this, I really wanted to get a perspective from, somebody who is inside the industry. And so I looked through a lot of different Reddit boards, particularly on the Genshin Impact. I looked also at Honkai Star Rail. I looked at Zenless Zone Zero as well. And so I kept looking, but they kept linking me to this post that was made 2 months ago, actually. And it's by someone named Bryn Oz12. It says here, why is English dub muted? Actual facts of the SAG-AFTRA strike and how dubbing really works. So this post is a little bit lengthy, but we're just going to go through the really most important parts, because this is some insider information, apparently, that's been on Reddit. So I can only say this is very alleged, but hopefully stuff lines up with what we've been experiencing so far, and hopefully it brings some more light to what we're understanding. Now, here it says, I've been seeing a lot of discussions and speculations regarding the English VA strike and how it's affecting HSR or Honkai Star Rail, and I really want to write something factual to clear things up regarding the strike. And the source is, their husband and father work in the LA movie industry. The husband went to theater school and has many friends and classmates who are active English voice actors, some of whom have voice roles in Hoyo games. In the disclaimer, they are not legal representative, and this post is based on their husbands, fathers, and friends' experiences working in the US voice acting and film industry. So here it says, none of the Hoyo games are union games, and it says that Genshin, HSR, and Zenless Zone Zero, all under Hoyoverse, are not union. Here it says here, unionization is per project, not per company. And it says here, the SAG-AFTRA website states that unionization is a project by project thing, not per company. That means one publisher can make union and non-union projects, in our case games, at the same time, which is entirely decided at the discretion of the publisher. So remember this important part here. So just because, even though they're all in the same game, just because maybe Genshin Impact is under strike does not mean that Honkai Star Rail or Zenless Zone Zero are also in strike. Some people can be striking, but not all at the same time, because at the discretion of every single different studio. So just want to point that out there. And so, looking at this even further, recording studios do not usually decide on the unionization of the game. So, it says here, in foreign game dubbing, the publisher, aka Hoyo, would usually find English-speaking casting directors, give them the casting documents, and ask them to find auditions suitable voice actors. The casting directors, who often own their recording studio or are hired attached to specific recording studios, would then ask the chosen voice actor to record at that studio, or merely record. These studios are not involved in deciding whether a game is unionized. Recording studios are not responsible for signing anything with SAG-AFTRA, and there is no such thing as Game X is struck because they're recording in Studio Y. At least according to this person, you can't entirely strike because you are at a studio, as I mentioned earlier. It says here, SAG-AFTRA strikes calls for the cessation of work on all union games. The strike specifically calls for VAs to stop working on all union games. Hoyo games, being non-union, are not involved in the strike. However, here, according to this link, it indicates the strike is against all covered services under the Screen Actors Guild Federation of Television and Radio Artists Interactive Agreement, Interactive Localization Agreement, and Interactive Low Budget Agreement. So, like I said earlier, just because it's not unionized does not mean they can just go willy-nilly and not work. So, because if you're under SAG, you have to take the strike no matter what, or you have to pay a fine. And it says here, actually, moving into our next point, SAG-AFTRA by default forbids union actors from working on non-union games. And so SAG-AFTRA has a global rule 1, which indicates that no member of SAG-AFTRA can work on any project that has not signed the SAG-AFTRA contract. This applies on a global scale and does not exempt non-English or non-USA projects. Only union games or those who pledge to join the union can sign the interim agreement. or in Hoyo's case, the Independent Interactive Localization Agreement, the current interim agreement can be signed by games who are currently affected by the strike. Non-union games that sign the agreement are agreeing to the union's terms as laid out in the agreement, and agreeing to a binding document from the union is effectively more or less saying, I'm willing to be a union. And it says here, union games cannot hire non-union actors, see edit. And it says here they actually and say this is not 100% true. Non-union VAs will not be removed immediately if Hoyo goes union, and Hoyo can Taft-Hartley, or the act we went over earlier. Then, if that is approved, the non-union VA becomes eligible to join SAG-AFTRA. However, one actor can only get a max of 3 Taft-Hartleys in their life before they have to join the union, or they are banned from all union projects. This eventually is why some non-union actors may not want to work union. And I do want to mention really quickly that well, at least when it comes to Hoyoverse, there has not been any official statements that I could find when it comes to this particular aspect. Okay, just gonna put that out there while we're parsing through all this. And now there's actually someone else who was inside the who is also campaigning for SAG, and actually a voice actor as well, also commented on this. So I'm just gonna take just a quick section of what they said here to that adds on to it, because a lot of it was regurgitating. So I just want to look at here when it comes down to SAG-AFTRA has banned all union voice actors from acting in Hoyo games effectively forever if the Hoyo games remain non-union. This is true per Global Rule 1 and is not a factor of the strike. So that's important. It says, if the Hoyo games become union or sign the Independent Interactive Localization Agreement, Hoyo has to remove all English VAs who are not currently non-union, or all these non-union VAs will have to join SAG-AFTRA. Actors who aren't already members will need to have Taft-Hartley form submitted by the signatory when Hoyo decides if it wants to produce games under the ILA. These actors will not be subject to removal from the project by SAG-AFTRA. As far as I know, the actual blowback for not submitting the Taft-Hartley would be on the signatory form in the form of a fine. And Hoyo games and choristers are not the target of SAG-AFTRA strike in a legal sense. They are collateral damage from the strike. Fans should understand that the employers we bargain with on this contract are a mix of developers, Insomniac, publishers, Take-Two, and recording studios Formosa. Funny how they're mentioned again, to name a few. The target of the strike is the IMA. Contracts get struck, not signatories. With that in mind, I would echo the sentiment that in a free-for-all use of AI to clone voices and create voiceovers without consent, control, or compensation would lead to a much worse industry for actors and a much worse product for fans. So I remain skeptical of any studio with the means, but not the intention to commit to a safe industry in writing. So, what have we learned so far? So, we learned what the conditions of a SAG contract are, or what the rules are for members. We've seen a sample of what a deal could look like, and we understand that in the case of Hoyoverse, it is not exactly unionized, or at least it's not a union game, so they can actually bring whoever they want to when it comes down to working on the game. And it's also down to the discretion of course, the voiceover studios, or the studios that are working on it, because as you know, some games are not muted, some games are muted, some games have signed contracts, some games have not signed contracts. So essentially, this whole idea with Genshin Impact and being voiceless is essentially one big collateral damage. So it's not just, this game, we want to strike this game, it's the industry as a whole they wanted to move forward. At least from what we've understood from every single party that we could get information on. And even though Hoyo has moved on to work with Side, it turns out that some people still can't voice, even though it's a new company that they're doing the dubbing with, at least for the English side. And of course, in terms of Japanese and Chinese and other languages, nothing's been outly stated, so I don't know exactly what that falls under, but mostly we're just focused on North America because that's the purpose of this video, but I'm just going to toss that in there as an idea. But now let's segue to the most recent drama that's been taking over the internet, at least in the Genshin Impact community, and it's been rather controversial for a lot of reasons, and it's actually tied to the strike. So as stated earlier, in Genshin Impact, since these strikes have started, a lot of voice actors and actresses have not been allowed to work on the game, and so which has led a lot of characters being voiceless. And one person that has been affected by this is somebody by the name of John Patinaud, and he is the voice of the character Kinich. in Genshin Impact. And so he actually released a statement about a few days ago talking about, hey everyone, if you've been playing the latest 5.5 update in Genshin Impact and are hearing Kinich speak for the first time in 6 months, it is not my voice. I've been recast. I've been withholding voiceover services during the SAG-AFTRA interactive strike because Hoyo Cognosphere wouldn't offer AI protections in the form of a SAG interim agreement. They kept my character dialogue silent for months. All the while, I had made the difficult decision to continue not going in until an interim agreement was signed, and this ultimately was why I was recast. Now, obviously, a recast is not what I wanted. I'd hoped first that any progress behind the scenes would be made and I could come back safely, or if recast auditions went out, my colleagues wouldn't read for them. Unfortunately, I was wrong. I absolutely adored playing Kinich. Genshin was my comfort game during the early parts of the pandemic, and it was a dream of mine to book a playable character. At the time, I didn't have an agent, didn't live in LA, or any connections that would get me close, but 4 years later, I did it, and the message I received from you all saying how much my performance as Kinich meant to you made my heart swell. I would and can return if Hoyo invites me back and signs an interim. I stand by my choices regardless of the outcome. Also, the strike is still ongoing. Please don't believe disinformation on the internet. My best wishes to the cast and production team. Thank you for everything, JP. So yeah, he was recast. And so naturally, there weren't people who were very happy about this. Whether you believe it's still right or not, I'll leave that up to you. And so looking at someone else, the recast member or the replacement actually ended up talking or at least posting on Twitter that they are the new role of Kinich. So someone by Jacob Takanashi. It says here, I'm honored to join the English cast of Genshin Impact as the voice of Kinich. Taking up the mantle of Malipo is a privilege, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to carry the flame from the previous flame bearer, John, who did an incredible job. Those are big shoes to fill, and I promise to give it my all, out of respect for him, for Hoyoverse, and for you, the fans. Thank you to Diana for their amazing direction and for helping me navigate the intricacies of this incredible game, and to Side Tokyo and Hoyo for the honor of bringing Kinich to life. I am deeply grateful for the privilege of entertaining you all. So, remember how I said earlier that they are working with Side Entertainment, or with Side. So this voice actor is actually on their side. So he is not bound by the same needs or the same ideas or the same strike as our previous one. So this allowed Kinich to be recast. Now, unfortunately for him, this came at a really bad time when he announced it, because if you actually look in the comments, some people weren't very happy about it. So particularly if I look at someone by the name of Kaylee Mills, and I believe Paimon's VA is also here. It says this actually kind of diabolical. If you need the money, at least take the role uncredited. This just comes off as an easy grab for clout. It's not a good look. And actually turns out that this person got community noted, and the person's actually based in Japan, so they would not have known about the role being recasted. Also, here the Zulu and Lima is also, this wasn't a passing of the torch. So that's actually Paimon's voice actress. And you can also see other people here. Someone named Valeria Rodriguez. I believe she voices, I think Sucrose is the one. And you have Stephanie Shea and then other people going over. So people weren't naturally happy about this. And so I'll just show you the thread that Paimon's voice actress had talked about it. So there's something called scabbing, where basically people who essentially take roles from other people. So remember, keep in mind that Karina is not unionized, so that's also why she can work on the game. And so I'll just leave it up on screen for you guys to read for yourselves, because this video is getting a bit long. And so now we also have somebody like Brianna Knickerbocker, who also voices, I believe she voices Hu Tao. And so she actually had, well, in a, accounts limited, but she also put in support of John Patinode. And so she also said some of us SMH when talked about, holding the line. So as I've been saying, a lot of people are not allowed to work on the game. And so when you break it down, it's a very big complicated mess. A lot of moving parts. But it turns out that it's not as simple as, Hoyo has to sign this agreement. And it's not as simple as, SAG has to, lessen their striking, more or less. And it's also not as simple as we could just recast the whole cast, because there's a lot of people involved, and recasting everybody could also be putting a lot of people out of work, and it's one big interwoven web that that we're in. So like I was saying earlier, yeah, this situation is very, very nuanced because there's a lot that we don't know, and we don't even know what the actual contract is when it comes down to what Hoyoverse has to sign. We also haven't gotten any statements about Hoyo wanting to stay like non-unionized or saying or why we want to unionize, but we are not sure when it comes down to it. And honestly, when I really look at this case as a whole, it's a lot of people being affected by stuff that is really out of their control. Now, I didn't actually go over every single person who talked about the controversy when it comes down to voice actors and voice actresses covering this situation, because there's actually stuff like death threats and, you know, weird stuff going on. So we're not really going to cover that in this video. So that's really what it is. But yeah, so hopefully this case can be solved. But the whole point of this video was meant to be inform you guys on the situation and to be more or less a definitive guide on how everything is really working in and of itself. Because there has been misinformation around the case, I wanted to take a look at every single party involved and take a look at everything that is evolving inside of this whole case. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see, you know, more of my content, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe and follow my social description below. I also want to put out an open invitation if any voice actor or actress wants to be interviewed and to give me some more details on this case. I am happy to, you know, interview you. Just DM me on Twitter, or you can even send me a message on my email or even my Instagram and the social in my description below. I also leave some stuff in the pinned comment. If you wish to read any of the legal documents that I also read and you want to take a look at it for yourself, all Reddit posts and documents will be linked down in the pinned comment below. But that's it for me today, and that's it from me, Ashy. So yeah, support VAs if you can, and of course support the strike, and hopefully that everything can be solved in the near future. But yeah, so tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below, and please keep it civil. Or I will take a read of your comments if you're not being constructive. Anyways, that's it today, so ciao ciao.